All right, looks like we are live on Standing for Truth for a very exciting debate. I've been looking forward to this one since we set it up. We've got Jackson Roe and NephilimFree here who are going to be debating the topic of age of the earth, old or young. So this is the big classic debate. Before we get started, though, I want to welcome everybody to Standing for Truth, where, of course, we host debates, discussions, and interviews. Now, I want to go over a couple reminders. As people are probably aware of, we are uploading Patreon exclusive videos, short clips, SFT and Mattman explains type videos. We just released one last night on Neanderthals, so please definitely check out our Patreon, as well as some more exciting shows coming up for everybody. We just had Kent Hovind here with us last night, so definitely check that one out. And next week on the 26th, we've got Dr. Charles Jackson with us here as well for a presentation on the missing facts of evolution, Big Bang to Homo sapiens. And there will be an audience Q&A there as well. So anyways, enough for me. Let's bring in the debaters for the night. We've got Jackson Roe and NephilimFree. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, why don't we, before we go into the format for the night, why don't we kind of break the ice? You both have been here before. Jackson, you were just here last week debating myself. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So to anybody who hasn't yet seen that debate, please check it out. Neff, you've been here a bunch of times as well.
I had my mic muted when you said that, and I meant to say, I tried to say thank you, and then I realized, for having us, and then my mic was muted, and they're like, "Durr, okay."
No problem, brother. No problem. Yeah, why don't we break the ice? A little bit about you guys, what's going on over at your channels. Why don't we start with Neff? Neff, thanks for being here, brother.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate you hosting. My name is Evan. I go by NephilimFree. I've been doing Christian apologetics on YouTube since 2007, so 14 years now. And I love to debate. That's my favorite hobby. I also love airgun spelunking and chess and photography. I'm a trained professional photographer, trained by the New York Institute of Photography. But my real love is creation and science and history and scripture. And so I love doing Christian apologetics. That's my big thing. And that's what I've been doing for about 14 years now. And I appreciate you hosting this debate. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Neff. I appreciate you giving us your time for today's exciting debate. Jackson, my good man, thanks so much for being here again. A little bit about yourself, what's going on over at your channel. Go ahead, Jackson.
Well, my channel is called Jackson Roe Science Show, just because it rhymed. Not nearly as old as Neff's channel, but some decent content. But I'm into exotic animals. I'm into photography, same as Neff. I'm not a professional photographer. I'm into following Middle Eastern affairs. I don't know. You guys probably heard about what's happening in the Middle East right now. I've been following that pretty close. I just keep up with the news. I'm just interested in science, history, just all that kind of stuff. And I actually got in a bit of trouble from my exotic animal hobby, but that's a discussion for another time. But anyway, that's about me. So we can go on.
I appreciate it, Jackson. I appreciate the introductions from the both of you. That's why this debate's going to be definitely one to remember. Jackson, you have a channel kind of focusing on this topic. Neff goes way back. Yeah. Neff's kind of a celebrity around here. So, Neff, I believe you are signing autographs at the end of the debate, right? What is it, $20 an autograph, I think you were saying?
I don't know, Neff.
We'll figure that out after. No, but seriously, so let's go right into the format for the evening. Okay, so it's going to be a formal debate. We have 10-minute opening statements. We are going to be starting with Jackson, followed by 5-minute rebuttals, then a second 5-minute rebuttal, followed by a 3-minute rebuttal, then a 25-minute discussion. Now, the point of the discussion is going to be for the debaters to ask each other questions, since everything prior to the discussion is going to be timed responses. So then we're going to be ending it with equally timed 5-minute closing statements and then an audience Q&A. So everybody in the chat, looks like we've already got a good lively chat. So please make sure you are tagging me with your question. That way I won't miss it, and we will have a good solid audience Q&A. So anyways, that being said, why don't we get right into the fun? We can hand it to Jackson. Jackson, you have up to 10 minutes, and the floor is yours. I'll start the timer though whenever you're ready.
All right, it probably won't take 10 minutes. Also, I just want to address that I'm really monotone. That's something that came up in the last debate, so I can't help it. I've tried, so just bear with me. All right.
No problem.
My position is that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. It certainly is older than 6,000 years, and there are many lines of evidence that prove this. Radiometric dating and ice cores are two of the best examples that prove an old Earth. Distant starlight proves the universe is about 13.7 billion years old. There are really few ways around these dating methods, though creationists have tried to get around them. Creationists often say radioactive decay rates or the speed of light are not constant. They also say that ice core layers don't always necessarily represent a single annual cycle. The argument that radioactive decay rates vary is a particularly bad one, in my opinion. For example, if a 6,000-year-old sample gave the appearance of being billions of years old, the sample should have been vaporized from the heat that would have generated through radioactive decay that rapidly. Same goes for the Earth that was 6,000 years old. The rapid accumulation of apparent radioisotope age would have vaporized it as well. Creation geologists have acknowledged that, but they don't really have a good explanation for it. There are many different radiometric dating methods, such as potassium-argon, uranium-lead, and argon-argon. They're often used to cross-reference each other and come out to within a few percent of the same age. For ice cores, scientists can tell visually and chemically that the layers do in fact represent annual cycles without exception. Annual rings are visible up to 55,000 years before the ice cores become too compacted to see visually, but a total of 800,000 years are known from ice cores by various dating methods. The chemical makeup of the ice layers proves an annual cycle as well. Hydrogen peroxide accumulates in summer layers in Greenland due to sunlight, which is lacking in winter. There is simply no explanation for this, other than it is in fact an annual cycle. Distant starlight is calculated by parallax using trigonometry. Since it would violate the theory of relativity for the speed of light to change, this is a particularly good argument for an old universe. There are many arguments for a young universe that are often based on faulty assumptions or bad math, in my opinion, which I hope to address in this debate. I'm not arguing there is no God, simply that the universe and Earth are old. Some lines of evidence that the universe or Earth are old include bristlecone pine dendrochronology. A single bristlecone pine was known to live up to about 5,000 years, but using dead bristlecone pines that don't decay in the environment they live in, they've been able to line up the rings to about 9,000 years of age. Also, a glass sponge, sea sponge, was found to be 11,000 years old based on its concentric rings. Sediment cores, paleomagnetism, the geologic column, starlight, supergiant stars and supernova, which have the appearance of age, crater accumulation on moons, and fossil locations in strata that don't cross over, indicating time periods, are all evidences of an old Earth, in my opinion. So that's pretty much my opening statement for that. Probably not quite 10 minutes, but yeah, that's it.
No, that's fine. That's fine, Jackson. Whatever time we don't use, what we'll do is either throw that into the discussion portion, depending on how the discussion is going, as well as into the audience Q&A. So that being said, thank you for your opening statement, Jackson. To the audience, please tag me with your questions, and let's hand it over to NephilimFree, who has 10 minutes, and I see your screen is shared, my good man. So whenever you are ready.
Okay, I'll address my, thank you. I'll address my opponent's claims in the open discussion part of this. Recently, fairly recently, 2005, scientists discovered some footprints in Mexico. Now, this one particular scientist used the highest tech there is to date the footprints, and she says they're 40,000 years old. But the university, now the references for what are on the side in the red box that I put on both screen slides. But these guys at the Berkeley geophysics lab say, no, she's wrong. They're 1 million years old. So, wow, we've got two top level scientists with two of the world's best geophysics laboratories dating the same footprints, human footprints in the earth, and coming up with wildly different dates. One says 40,000 years old, not willing to budge on it. The other says, no, it's over 1 million, and we're not going to budge. Which one is right? 40,000 and 1 million, that's a big difference. So we don't even know how the planet formed. 2010, NASA published a science paper stating that the formation of the Earth is or planets is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in astrophysics. We don't know. They have a theory, it's a naturalistic one, but science doesn't support it. And Science Daily published in 2012, it doesn't even make sense that a planet could form knowing the laws of physics that we have today. So how do we get a planet? Scientific experiments in formation of planets using matter that bumps into each other to see if it'll accrete or stick have been performed since the early 1970s. The results are always the same. The bits of matter don't stick. They shatter each other or they bounce off and go flying off in different directions. Matter doesn't stick. There's no naturalistic method by which science can show that a planet can form. So the Earth, we don't have any scientific reason to believe the Earth could form naturally. Now, cold slabs of the Earth's oceanic crust have been found deep inside the Earth, all the way down to the mantle. They're 3,000 to 4,000 degrees colder than the materials around them. There's a secular source at the top and a creationist one at the bottom. They say the same thing, except the creationist says it's impossible for those slabs of material to be millions of years old and not have warmed up to the temperature of the material around them if they're pushed down into the Earth at the rate your fingernails grow. So how in the world are these slabs deep inside the Earth and millions, 100 million years old, and they have not risen in temperature significantly in 100 million years? Well, that's because they were shoved down there by the catastrophic plate tectonics of the Noahic flood. That would explain why they're thousands of degrees difference. But the secular camp is left scratching their heads. Here's a secular source for that. Graveyard of cold slabs mapped in Earth's mantles. Published in Science. These guys are not creationists. Now, I don't have time to explain all the data that I can show you on the screen here. What I'm showing you on the screen is ridiculous discrepancies in radiometric dating. The materials deep inside the Earth materials on higher levels in the Earth's geologic column, as it's called, inherit ages from the materials deep inside the Earth because that's where they came from. There are all manner of examples of this. Lots of examples. So there are lots of dating methods we can use to date the Earth. 90% of them date the Earth as young. Only 10% old. This is a list of them. I'm not going to read all these for you, but we could go through these, and 90% of all dating methods that can be used to date the Earth come up with a young age of the Earth. Only 10% an old one, and those are riddled with assumptions. Here's an example. The Unicarete Plateau basalt in the Grand Canyon. It's dated, you see the arrow pointing to it, it's dated at 1,143 million years old. by the same dating method, the Cardenas basalt, which is deeper in the earth, is dated 1,111 million years old. So wait, the stuff on top of it that was laid down on top by sedimentation is older than the stuff below? That's a problem for your ideas about the geologic column, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to pass over much of what I've got. If I was to actually give all the scientific evidence that the Earth is young, it would take me hours. I don't have that kind of time. Hours. So Himalayan granite, supposedly 21 million years old, it dated 1715, 3 million years old, according to the zircons in it. Same thing with Australian granite. Same thing with New Zealand granite. Crazy discrepancies. Are dating methods reliable? No, they're not. They're not. They're not. They are riddled with assumptions, and they're not empirical. By empirical, I mean that means that they provide actual, scientifically true, validated evidence that can be used repeatedly, and it's always the same. Empirical means observable and testable. What's empirical is observable and testable. So dating methods, radiometric dating methods, are not empirical science. They cannot be used to date anything. What you see here is a list of scientific papers that demonstrate a young Earth age for the Earth. There's been many. Some of these dates go back to 1968. Some of them are in the 2000s. There's been many examples of scientific research that demonstrates the Earth is young. The evolutionists pay no attention to it, scoff at it, and turn their backs. They don't care. But the research has been done by excellent scientists using the best laboratories in the world. And here's a beautiful list of scientific studies performed by creationist scientists that all show the Earth is young, some of them using the very methods evolutionists use. Now, the rate of the Earth's magnetic field has been discovered to have a half-life of 1,400 years. At that rate, it would be impossible for the Earth to be millions of years old. If it were millions of years old, it would have had the magnetic field of a magnetic star just a million or so years ago. If the Earth ever had a magnetic field so great, there would be no iron in your body instantly. Gone. That fast. Because the gravity, the magnetism of the Earth would literally snatch every atom of iron out of your body instantaneously. Pow! Gone. And you'd fall dead within a minute or three. Because you need the iron. Your brain requires it to function. You'd fall dead within minutes. So it's not possible for the Earth to be millions of years old. There is a Roche limit. If the Earth and Moon were ever 18,470 kilometers apart, the Moon would literally rip itself to bits. But scientists who are secular claim the Moon is a blob of matter that split off from the Earth and moved away from it slowly. That's not possible. That's impossible. Because it would have been within the Roche limit, and it would have literally been discombobulated. It could never have formed. Scientists Russell Humphreys and geologist Steve Austin have demonstrated with scientific studies that the amount of salt in the oceans of the Earth demonstrate the Earth is young. It's impossible for there to be the Earth to be millions of years old. If it were, the amount of salt in the oceans of the Earth today would have literally choked all life on the Earth to death. There would be no oceanic life greater than a coccolithophore. It's impossible. The Earth is young. Here's a small sample of the number of sedimentation experiments, sedimentology experiments, going all the way back to 1952 that demonstrate that sedimentary strata form rapidly in groups right before your very eyes in the laboratory. Creationist geologist Steve Austin made a scientific discovery that's now accepted to be true by even the secular camp. There is a strata that runs the entire 256 plus miles of the geologic column in the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
1 minute.
Littered with 1 billion nautiloids, some of them in the vertical position, which means that they were stuck in a flow. This means the entire geologic column formed rapidly by catastrophic events. The Earth has many megasequences. These are sedimentary strata formations that span the continents because of a global flood explains the geologic column. The laws of angular horizontality and lateral continuity demonstrate that the strata that cover the Earth were all formed rapidly. Sedimentary experiments. Let me show you this. So start at the bottom. If these strata represent millions of years going down, the bottom picture, you go up to the yellow, then how does this single gigantic formation of one
15
strata
seconds.
of sand also represent millions of years? And the one above it also represent millions of years? No. Only catastrophism can explain such a massive amount of sediment laid down on top of layers that are millions of years old. The evidences are extensive and overwhelming. The Earth is young.
Okay, perfect timing. That was 10 minutes right on the dot. I appreciate it. Neff, that concludes the 10-minute opening statements. Thank you to both Jackson and Neff. Jackson, we are now moving into the first 5-minute rebuttal round of this debate. So we're going to hand it over to you. And Neff, just a little something in the private chat. Just make sure you check that as Jackson's doing his rebuttal. That being said, to the audience, please tag me with your questions. And Jackson, you are on mute. Just make sure you unmute yourself. You've got 5 minutes whenever you're ready. Oh, Jackson, just make sure you unmute yourself.
You talked
Yeah,
about the
you're
varying
good.
dates of volcanic ash footprints. I suspect, I haven't heard of this, but I suspect that one used the incorrect dating method for it, like potassium argon. I know that's been done before. I've read about that. So it's basically like weighing an elephant on a scale meant for a human. You're going to get an answer back, but it's going to be the wrong answer. So that's what I suspect happened with the footprints, the two different answers. But I don't know. But talked about there's no way for the Earth to form naturally. Well, we see planetary nebulas forming now. We see, and gravity is the thing that pulls all that together. Talked about catastrophic plate tectonics. I don't think that's a good explanation because the amount of kinetic energy that would have been released during all of the plates moving at once, say during the flood, would have created so much energy that the oceans would have just been sent into space, basically. Let's see. Talked about the Earth's magnetic field. Well, the Earth's magnetic field varies too, and paleomagnetic research shows that the Earth's magnetic field is reversed. The polarity is reversed many times, and the intensity goes up and down. That's evidenced through paleomagnetism. So it wasn't always constant, and if it was, we would have been to the level of a magnetar, like you said, but it wasn't, so that's not the case. The distance from the moon moves away from us at about 3.8 centimeters per year. So that's consistent with an ancient system. Salt in the ocean. There are processes that take salt out of the ocean at about an equal rate that it's put into the ocean through rivers and runoff, like the formation of diatomaceous earth. If we're going by that standard, then aluminum accumulation, the Earth should be about 100 years old. But there are processes that take excess aluminum out of the ocean. So, of course, the Earth isn't 100 years old. And some strata does get deposited rapidly, but some strata can't be deposited rapidly, like evaporative salt deposits and chalk deposits. It doesn't make any sense for all of these microscopic animals to die on top of each other in massive formations in the span of a global flood. So I think those were most, if not all, of your points that I wrote down. So yeah, you can take it away from here.
Okay, thank you for that 5-minute rebuttal, Jackson, just with a couple minutes to spare, and therefore we can toss that into the discussion portion as well. So that being said, let me just stop the timer here, and we can hand it over to Neph. Neph, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes as well, and I've just unmuted you, Neph, so the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll address the subject, the things that you're bringing up. I would point out that Standing for Truth addressed the heat problem with the creationist scientist recently on his channel. You might want to check for that. Can I screen share? Yeah, thank you. So let me show you just a few of the hundreds of reasons we know the Earth is young. What you see here is Coconino sandstone. Evolutionists claim this was wind-blown sand. It was laid down by aeolian processes over millions of years. Deposited. Even the secular camp acknowledges that these silicates came from the Appalachian Mountains area. That's a long way for wind to deposit it. But look, it can't be. It had to have been formed by water, because you see the parabolic recumbent fold there? That only happens in water. Wind can't make that. So the entire geologic column and all of the Coconino sandstone, the Navajo sandstone formations that span thousands of square miles across the southwest of the North American continent were laid down by water. Now, if that's true, the entire geologic column was laid down by water. Okay, all of it. None of it was aeolian. You cannot get a recumbent fold in air. It only can happen in liquid, a liquid state. This is what's called a drop stone. They're found thousands upon millions of them in the geologic column. You see how the sedimentary strata were soft and moist as they bent around that rock? That strata can't be millions of years old. It can't be tens of thousands. It can't be 100 years old. Because the rock, the sedimentary material, transported that rock there with water and bent around it as it formed. Here's a quartzite boulder that weighs a couple of 1,000 pounds. You can see the sedimentary strata form around it, inside of a mountain. Okay, it was transported by fast moving water that was capable of moving a couple of 1,000-pound quartzite boulder at a faster rate than you can probably run, and then bent the strata all around it. Did the strata form thousands of years old, over thousands of years, like the evolutionists claim? No. This photograph right here kills everything about the age of the Earth. Everything. It has an anticline and a syncline. You see the valley here? The valley exists because the mountains on the left and the right were pushed up and curved. You see how they're curved? They're curved because all of this material going deep into the earth was soft, moist, sedimentary material recently laid down by the Noachian flood and pushed up by geological forces. Solid rock does not bend. It will not bend. It breaks. At surface temperatures, it breaks. So how does all these mountains, which were pushed up out of the earth, how are they curved? They're curved because the entire geologic column was soft, moist materials recently deposited by the Noachic flood. The continents were moving. The horizontal pressure forced these materials up, creating two mountain ranges going down with a gigantic valley in between. And the mountain is rolled here because it was soft like Play-Doh, moist, recently deposited. Gravity had not sucked all the water out of it. It had not concreted into rock yet. It was still moist like Play-Doh when this was bent. Now, that takes all your millions of years away and just throws them away. It's impossible. You see, if this photograph is real, your idea that the Earth is millions of years old, even 1 million years old, cannot be true. It's impossible. Because rock does not bend unless it's subjected to over 500 degrees centigrade deep inside the Earth, according to secular scientists, 10 to 20 kilometers down inside the Earth. But this is the surface of the Earth. These mountains are all the surface of the Earth, which has been uplifted by horizontal pressure in the continent. All of it was the surface. You see this land right here? That's the surface. The side of the mountain, that's the same as the valley floor. It's just the valley, the flatland, has been lifted up and bent. This means there is no such thing as uniformitarianism. This photograph right here kills everything every uniformitarianist believes about the age of the earth. It's impossible.
40 seconds.
Because you believe that these strata here, going from the surface right here, and a human would be an absolute dot, smaller than a pixel on the screen right here. If you were standing on the side of this mountain, he would be an absolute minuscule dot. This is a big mountain. You'd be nothing. You couldn't see him in this photograph. The resolution's not great enough. These are trees right here. Now imagine how small a human is. Okay, these mountains are bent. All this sedimentary material is bent. The only way it's going to be bent is because it's soft and moist. And these mountains didn't rise over millions of years. They rose over hours to weeks. And that kills uniformitarianism. Sorry, the earth cannot be old.
Okay, just on time. Gentlemen, that concludes the first round of rebuttals. We are now moving into the second round of rebuttals. This, again, will be 5 minutes from the both of you. We're going to hand it over to Jackson. To the audience also, looks like we've got some questions coming in and some super chats. I appreciate all the support, guys. God bless you, and thanks for the questions as well. So, Jackson, whenever you are ready, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
All right, it probably won't take 5 minutes. I don't have much written down, but for the folded strata, experiments have shown that rocks can fold under pressure. I think he said that when they're deep in the earth. Friedman et al. 1980 experiments proved that rocks can fold under heat and pressure. And then those folded rock layers are then pushed up by plate tectonics. So as for him saying that it's a long way for sand to blow from the eastern part of the country to the western part of the country, the Sahara sand can blow halfway around the world. And I agree, some strata is laid down by water, but not all of it. All of it can't be laid down instantly by one catastrophic event. There is some geologic processes that take longer than that. Now, does that necessarily disprove a global flood? No, but it does disprove that all of the strata was laid down at one time, in my opinion. And I think any serious geologist would agree, most of them anyway, not all of them, but most of them. But, it's a field of authority. That's not really how it works, but, All right, that's all really I have to say. We can go to the next one.
Okay, I appreciate that rebuttal there, Jackson. We are now going to hand it over to Neph. Neph, you have a 5-minute rebuttal. If you need me to share screen, please let me know.
Yeah, please do share my screen. Secular scientists state that for rock to deform, I don't have time to look up the slide. I've got references for this. You can find them yourself. Secular scientists state that for rock to deform, it has to be 10 to 20 kilometers down inside the earth. So the photograph that I shared with you, this one, proves their ideas. Well, what I'm trying to say is, if they're correct, and for rock to deform, it must be 10 to 20 kilometers down inside the earth, this photograph still refutes uniformitarianism, because these rocks were never 10 to 20 kilometers down, and they're deformed. You see, these are the surface of the earth that was bent and bowed upward, curved. The rocks are all curved. All the strata, hundreds and hundreds of strata in these rocks, thousands, are all curved. Now, they were never 10 to 20 kilometers down, unless you want to believe that there was 10 to 20 kilometers of overburden on top of them that eroded away. Now, if that were true, that means 10 to 20 kilometers of the entire continent eroded and went away. Now, you have to explain to me how evolution is going on and millions of new species are coming into being in an environment so violent that over a period of just a few million years, 10 to 20 kilometers of the entire continent is eroding. Under such erosion conditions, the speed of that erosion would be insane. There would have to be a monsoon going on top of the earth everywhere continually to erode that kind of material that fast under your ideas. Do you see? It's not plausible. It can't be true. These materials were never 10 to 20 kilometers down, and yet they're deformed. They were not deformed by heat and pressure. Now, you mentioned one thing that really got me going. You said ice cores demonstrate the Earth is of great age. That is absolutely not true. That's antiquated science. Evolutionists refuse to give up the ghost on this fake idea. There was an airplane in 1944 made P-38 warplane that crash landed. A squadron of these guys crash landed on a glacier in Greenland near the end of World War II. You know, they went back 65 years later to find those aircraft. You know where they found them? They found them 256 feet down inside that glacier. They melted the ice, pumped the water out, retrieved those machines, and rebuilt them, restored them, and they fly now. They were under 256 feet of layers of ice. That's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of layers of ice. And yet those airplanes were built in 1944. So, are those thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of layers of ice in that glacier, do they represent tens of thousands to millions of years old? The answer is absolutely cannot. So this fake idea, it's antiquated science. It's a 1930s to 40s idea that layers of ice in glaciers represent annual deposition, and they don't. They represent snowstorms. You can have 50 snowstorms in Montana in a year in one place. I've been there. I lived there for 3 years. I know. So this ice cores thing is a fake argument. It's antiquated science. Evolutionists refuse to get on board with modern science. They hold to antiquated ideas whenever it seems to suit their ideas instead of giving up the ghost on them. Because science has proven that ice layers, no matter how much they're compacted in a glacier, do not represent a single annual layer of ice. Any given snow event can create a layer of ice. And if it snows 40 times a year or 150 times a year in Greenland, you could have 150 layers of ice that will eventually get compacted because there are more layers of ice adding to it. So ice layers don't prove anything. Glacier Girl proves that. 1944 aircraft retrieved under 256 feet of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of layers of ice. And the plane was made in 1944.
10 seconds.
Okay, I'll conclude there.
Okay, I appreciate that. Gentlemen, that concludes the second 5-minute rebuttal round. And we're now moving into the 3-minute uninterrupted rebuttals. And Neph, it looks like there's just a slight crackling coming from your headset or your mic. I'm not sure if there's anything we can do about that, but I just wanted to at least point that out to you.
I tell you what, I've heard this before. So I'm going to leave the debate, come right back with a different headset enabled. I'll be gone probably 60 seconds or less.
Sure. Take your time. Take your time. We'll have a little intermission as you're gone. And okay, so to the audience, I've got your questions. Lots of great questions coming in. And thank you so much for the super stickers, super chat. So we're going to be moving into the 3-minute rebuttal when Neph gets back, followed by the discussion portion, which will have about 30 to 40 minutes. I've added some time to the discussion portion, whatever time was not used in the openings and rebuttals. So some reminders to people. It looks like we got some new people in the chat since the reminders I gave earlier. So Make sure you're here for the 26th. That's next week. Dr. Charles Jackson will be here with us again. He was here about 6 or 7 months ago for an audience Q&A. We're going to have a presentation followed by another audience Q&A. So bring your questions. That's going to be a lot of fun. We've also got on the 28th, we've got the creation research team back with us, Dr. Diane Eager, as well as John McKay, who's going to be here for a presentation on origin of races. As always, an audience Q&A as well. So think up those questions and make sure you are here that day. We've also got just scheduled Jackson Roe. You're going to be back here with us next month on June 11th. This time for a debate on intelligent design versus naturalistic evolution. You'll be taking on John Maddox, who goes by Logical, Plausible, Probable on YouTube. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And just a few days after that debate, actually, we've got a debate on, does the Bible teach young earth creation? It's going to be CJ Cox debating Kenny Rhodes, Dr. Kenny Rhodes from Reason to Believe. As people know, is Hugh Ross's ministry. So that's going to be a lot of fun as well. Michael J. Ord's going to be back here with us next month, as well as Dr. Gordon Wilson. I'm excited for our second show with Dr. Gordon Wilson because he's written a ton for Answers in Genesis pertaining to topics such as beetles, scorpions, lethal lizards, as well as God's cool creatures. So that's set in the event section. That'll be in an audience Q&A as well. Some people in the chat, Org says, wait, what happened? Neff is just changing his headset. There was a little bit of crackling going on, so he is just switching his headset, and he should be back here in about a minute. So that being said, here he is actually. Neff, good to have you back.
How's my sound?
A lot better, a lot more clear.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Perfect, actually.
What's going on with that device? It used to provide stellar performance. Seems like something has changed, but I've got a actual USB headset. It's not wireless, so I'm using a Logitech plug-in USB. So the connection can't be bad. It can't be a funky thing because it's plugged straight into USB. So it sounds looks like it's doing good. So sorry for that.
That's okay.
Next time I join one of your debates, I'll just make sure I'm using this plug-in USB headset. That'll prevent that from happening again. Because we had this issue before, and it was a problem. I'll stop that from happening.
It's perfect. Problem solved, brother. So it looks good, and I'm glad we could resolve that, I guess, before the discussion portion. So why don't we then move into the 3-minute uninterrupted rebuttals? Jackson, I'm going to hand it over to you. You have up to 3 minutes, and whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Okay. Well, he was talking about plate tectonics and erosion. Well, plate tectonics is an incredibly slow process. The plates move about 4 inches a year, I believe. So these things are getting pushed up very slowly over time, at least according to my model. So it wouldn't really be an issue for the animals except for periodic earthquake, which we still deal with today. As for the airplane under the ice in Greenland, despite the thickness, it still would have represented just one layer in an ice core. Might have been an incredibly thick layer, but it still would have looked like a winter layer. And if you take accumulation in around Lake Vostok in Antarctica, the accumulation is way lower. It's probably not even, probably inches per year. And those get compacted down. And again, chemical processes from UV radiation prove that there are annual rings. The summer rings show salt and hydrogen peroxide in those layers, which can only form from the summer months, or the winter months rather. So the rings are not really an antiquated idea. So That's all I have written down. So I'll pass it on to you again.
All right, thank you, Jackson. That's your 3-minute rebuttal with about a minute and a half to spare. So once again, we'll throw that into the discussion portion where we can discuss these various arguments that are being brought up in the rebuttals and opening statements. So Neph, the floor is yours, my good man. You have 3 minutes whenever you're ready. Oh, Neph, you might be on mute.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. You're good to go.
So you said they represent the ice layers on top of Glacier Girl represent a single ice layer. So you're making an exception for a big glacier in Greenland, while all the glaciers of the world are thousands of layers, which you acknowledge. But you're going to say the one found with a 1944 P-38 aircraft in it, it represents one layer? That sounds utterly preposterous to me. Is there any reason to believe that 256 feet of ice in a glacier in Greenland could represent only one layer, while all the other glaciers of the world represent thousands of layers? Thousands and thousands? I think that's, I have to say it, possibly one of the worst arguments I've ever heard from a uniformitarianist in my life. I just can't imagine. That is beyond special pleading. That is just outrageous. It cannot be true. The glaciers, this glacier couldn't have formed by any process other than the same process that forms all the other glaciers all over the world: Montana, Canada, Iceland, Idaho. It doesn't matter where they are. Sweden. The same process makes glaciers. Okay, so this, you're just wishing it away. It sounds to me. The glacier, the plain was found in 256 feet deep ice. Now, if you want to say it's not true that it wasn't, well, you're welcome to believe that. But then what you need to do is go and look it up on the internet for yourself, because the men who found that airplane, they're old now. Some of them have died since they made their website, but they made a website and they actually documented recovering that aircraft photographically. And so they actually did it. They got a website devoted to that airplane. They documented, they spent thousands and thousands of dollars on equipment and manpower to recover those airplanes from the earth, from inside that glacier. And you can go look at their website. They have a website where they describe the process of recovering that airplane from 250 some odd feet down inside a glacier in Greenland. They melted the ice with heaters and blowers and then pumped it out with a heat pump with a gasoline engine to get the water out so they could make a cavern inside and retrieve the parts. And they have a website where they document this photographically. So they really did do it, and the plane really is flying. I mean, the VIN number is probably verified by the United States Air Force, right? So, I mean, it's really true. It really was in 256 feet of ice. And that cannot be one layer of ice.
15 seconds.
Thousands and thousands of layers of ice. So you're holding to a fake idea that's been around for a long time. Evolutionists have a hard time giving up. This idea that an ice layer represents a vast period of time. It represents a snowfall. That's all it does. That's all it represents. A single snowfall.
All right, just on time. Well, that concludes the 3-minute rebuttals. We've gone through our opening statements and our 3 rounds of rebuttals: 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and 3 minutes. So we are now moving into an open discussion where the debaters are going to ask each other questions pertaining to the topic, of course. We'll keep it cordial, professional, and clean, and as equally timed as possible. So that being said, why don't we hand it to Jackson Roe, because NephilimFree just ended with his rebuttal. Jackson, why don't you start us off in this discussion portion? Maybe there's a couple points you wanted to make or a question you wanted to start off with. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours, and of course, I'll moderate if necessary. Go ahead.
All right. Well, first, I just want to say I'm not saying that never happened. The plane was clearly recovered. I'm just saying that just because the snowfall was incredibly thick doesn't mean it doesn't represent the winter layer. Its accumulation of snow varies from place to place in Greenland and in Antarctica. So I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm just saying that that doesn't necessarily mean that that isn't one layer, albeit a very thick one, that would get compacted down over time. But my question is about the glass sponge. How would you explain the concentric rings, growth rings of the glass sponge being 11,000 years old and not, say, just 6,000 years old?
I'm not familiar with this argument, this glass sponge. I'm not familiar with it. If you wanted to elaborate on it very quickly, I might be able to respond to it. As for Glacier Girl, the problem is that you're special pleaded for one glacier being a single layer of ice, which is preposterous scientifically. Every glacier has to be thousands of layers of ice, all of them. And this kills the evolutionist idea that layers of ice represent annual, deposition of ice, snow. It's not possible. It just can't be true. You also mentioned, in response to my the mountain range photograph that I showed, where the surface was curved up, you seem to kind of dismiss that. But I would ask you to reconsider that, because you would have to believe that solid rock bends at surface temperatures within 1,000, 1,500 feet deep inside the earth. The solid rock will bend. If you can provide a reason to believe that solid rock bends when it's anywhere from the surface of the earth temperature maybe 20 degrees higher, then we could believe that rock can bend and those mountains could be. If not, those mountains were created by sedimentary strata that were deformed because they were still soft and moist, recently deposited by the flood. If you have a rebuttal to that, I'd sure love to hear it.
Well, I don't think there's any reason to think that they formed on the surface. I think that it's perfectly reasonable to think they formed deeper down and were under pressure at one point, and plate tectonics brought them to the surface.
SFT, could you share that photograph for me, please? You said you doubt that they were formed on the surface, but my friend, take a look. You see the trees growing here? They grow all the way up here to where
Yes.
the air gets too thin, and they don't grow very well. This material is curved. You see the curvature? Here's the curvature going down. The valley is what the surface of the earth was before. These mountains, it's quite obvious just from looking at it, they're curved up because they were forced up and they broke free. And these were once the surface of the earth and they've been pushed up. So this material was never deep inside the earth. Never. It was always the surface of the earth that got shoved upward. Now, that means it was never subjected to the temperatures deep inside the earth that secular scientists say, and they're correct about this, that material must be in order for it to be formed by heat and pressure, 10 to 20 kilometers down. That's what they all agree on. Okay. So, and they're right about that. That's where the temperature is high enough for the materials to be deformed. Yet all these mountains are highly deformed material strata. They're curved. That can't happen, solid rock. Solid rock doesn't bend, it breaks. And you see how thick this is? Like I said, a human being would be smaller than a pixel on that screen. Much, much smaller, a tiny fraction of a pixel. This is from here to there is probably 1,000 feet, maybe 700 feet at least, right? That's a lot. You're going down into the earth. That material, at that depth, the material is not anywhere near hot enough for rock to bend. You have to go 10 to 20 kilometers down, according to secular geologists. So how do you have this? Curved. If it wasn't soft and moist sedimentary material that was deformed because it was still plastic, you know what I mean by that? It still contained a lot of water and was soft and would bend like mud, right? If that's not true, why is it curved?
Well, I just think it probably formed in deeper in the earth. I'm not seeing any reason why that wouldn't be the case.
Well, we can see that it was once the surface of the earth pushed up. Okay, so if your idea there was deeper in the earth once before, then deformed, then it had to have been shoved up through the 10 to 20 kilometers of material before it reached the surface after it was deformed. Why is it so pristine? Why does it have such sharp edges? Secondly, what happened to the 10 to 20 kilometers of sedimentary material? What happened to the 10 to 20 kilometers of material, the overburden, as geologists would call it, that was on top of that? Wouldn't it have to erode away to reveal the mountains as they are?
Some of it probably did erode away, but I think you're looking at the tree line on top and saying that's
some of it. Wait,
what?
If for this material, according to secular geologists, would have to be 10 to 20 kilometers deep inside the earth to be deformed like that. I'm not making up things, and I don't lie for God. That's what secular geologists say. I can show you a reference if you gave me time to look it up. Secular from the University of Houston and University of Tulane University. Sedimentary material has to be 10 to 20 kilometers down inside the earth for it to be deformed. Okay. So that would mean if not the surface of the earth that was deformed and pushed up, then there was 10 to 20 kilometers of sedimentary material on top of that is now gone when this was pushed up to become the surface of the earth, right? Where did that 10 to 20 kilometers of material go? Now, if it disappeared in the lifespan of that mountain, let's say that uniform materialists say those mountains are 140 million years old. I'll be generous. 140 million years old. That means 10 to 20 kilometers of the Earth's continent disappeared in 140 million years. But wait, you believe as an evolutionist that animals are evolving into various thousands of different species while the Earth is eroding so fast it's literally washing out under their feet. Can you explain why we should believe such a thing?
Well, erosion doesn't happen that fast, and plate tectonics doesn't happen that fast.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. But I think you're seeing the tree line at the top of the mountain and saying that was once the surface of the earth, and it may have been, but it was also once maybe the deep down. So I think we just have two different interpretations of this, and we're not going to come to an agreement on how this formed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I accept that you won't accept, the argument that I'm providing, but I think the evidence is, beyond reason and overwhelming as it is. But I mean, if the Earth were millions of years old, have you ever considered the rate at which the continents are eroding? I don't have a slideshow present for that right now, but it's astonishing. The coastlines of various countries, England, California, various places, Louisiana, they're disappearing at a rate that's just shocking. I mean, Texas, for example, the state of Texas, their government and the research that they've sponsored with their own state money has shown that numerous meters of the coastline of Texas are literally disappearing every single year. And in California, for example, they have to truck in thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of tons of sand and dump them on their beaches every year to keep the beach, so they can keep their tourist money. Otherwise, they have no beach. See, so if that's kind of erosion is happening at that rate, you have to think, how in the world could the continents be millions of years old if the coast in California is eroding at meters per year? How many meters per year? Let's say 3 meters per year. Just be generous. Just 3. 3 meters times a million, that's 3 million meters in a million years. You know how long 3 million meters is? That's miles. Right? Now do that over 1 million years or 100 million years. Would there even be a continent? So do you see the discrepancy between your idea that the continents are hundreds of millions of years old and the rate at which they're eroding, according not to creationist scientists, but secular geologists. They measure these things themselves, and they publish the rates. But you know what they never talk about is the conclusion as to what we can conclude about that rate. They don't talk about that because they would have to be a young Earth creationist to accept the facts. How do you explain that?
Well, I
Go ahead,
agree that
Jackson.
erosion is taking what?
Oh, I was just going to say, if you want, Jackson,
Yeah.
take as much time as you need.
Yeah,
To
I was kind of
respond.
long-winded. Jackson, take 4, 5, 6 minutes, if you want. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I
no,
didn't
no,
mean.
All right.
no,
Yeah,
that's okay. That's
take
okay.
your time, man. Take your time.
All right. Well, I agree that erosion's taking away beaches and areas, but it's also accumulating in other areas. And again, going to plate tectonics, but plate tectonics is pushing up new material. Like old mountains do get eroded over time, but new mountains are constantly being pushed up. For example, the Himalayas are still rising by a couple inches a year, but eventually plates will settle in that area, start spreading in another area, and those mountains will erode over the next hundreds of millions of years, however long it takes. But yeah, so I think erosion rates aren't constant everywhere, and it has to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear. It goes to another location, that material. So it's not just eroding everywhere at once. So that's my answer to that.
And go ahead, Neff. The floor is yours.
Well, its erosion has to be happening everywhere. It's always happening everywhere. Take a look at these mountains. These mountains have literally been rolled on their side. You see how the sedimentary strata are curved, and not only are they curved, and that's a huge area. It would take you'd be pumping sweat to walk from one end of that to the other. That's a long way. That's a mile. That thing is a mile wide. Look how small those trees are. Those are trees inside that thing. Okay, it would take you a lot of effort to walk from one side to the other. That thing isn't little; it's huge, and yet you can see the curve that I put on the screen. This is how these things have moved. It was once flat, the surface of the Earth. They got squeezed this way and bowed, and not only that, but it was rolled over. So these strata, if you continued them, they would curve way out this way. This mountain has been rolled. Just so happens the book of Job says, He is wise in heart and mighty in strength, who hath hardened himself against him and hath prospered, which removeth the mountains, and they know it not, which overturneth them in his anger. So I see evidence that God rolled the mountains during the Noahic flood, just as the book of Job says. But the secular scientists, they can't explain why these strata are folded and rolled. All this mountain and the deep into the earth, deep beyond that, miles deep, and for every mile that you can see with us to the left and right, all had to be soft, moist, sedimentary material recently deposited for it to be rolled and folded like this. Because solid rock doesn't, it would crumble. If that kind of geologic pressure was added to the materials that were on the surface of the earth, it would literally turn it into a pile of gravel. But look at this remnant that stands up like a pillar, a column, a wall of solid material. That's a sedimentary strata that was flat. The geologic law of lateral horizontality states, and this has been accepted by uniformitarians, strata are laid down flat, horizontally, left and right. That's how they originally originate. They don't originate vertically. They originate horizontally, and if they're not in the vertical position, it's because they were forced into a different position by geological forces. So this material, the whole mountain, and this column, this right here, this remnant of a strata that's pointing upward, was rolled so that it's vertical when it was once horizontal, right? But it can't happen if it's solid rock. It's not possible. It would crush. It would turn into gravel. Solid rock doesn't bend, especially on the surface of the earth. Horizontal pressures allow that would cause this entire mountain to roll, would literally turn all of this, everything you see, into a big pile of gravel. It had to be soft and moist. Now, if all of this sedimentary strata going deep into the earth was soft and moist when it was formed, there is no millions of years for mountain formation. It's impossible. And the flood of Noah is the only thing that could possibly explain it. How do you respond to that?
Well, again, I think these layers formed deep in the earth and were subject to heat and pressure that hit them, were eventually pushed up by plate tectonics. But how would you explain some some geologic strata which can't be formed in a catastrophic event like a flood, like chalk, like evaporative salt deposits? How would you explain those? I mean, they don't really work in a single flood.
Well, chalk is an amazing thing. Dinosaur fossils have been found in chalk. Again, you allude that there had to have been 10 to 20 kilometers of material above these mountains that I show in this picture. But for that to have eroded away, then the earth would have literally had to have eroded while an animal goes to bed at night and it gets a new layer of material when he wakes up in the morning. So every animal would be living in a slough of water that's constantly flowing over hundreds of millions of years. For that erosion rate to take place, to get rid of the 10 to 20 kilometers of overburden on top of this material, you're talking about an erosion rate that wouldn't allow complex organisms to even exist on the planet. It's not possible. Suppose a mouse went to sleep beside the tree trunk and while water's flowing over him. And how's he going to find food tomorrow morning when water's flowing across the surface of the earth, eroding the earth? It's not possible. You see, it just can't be true. But so this idea is it's not plausible. It's impossible for there to have been that much overburden on top of this material. It eroded away over hundreds of millions of years. It's impossible. You didn't address it. You just keep repeating this thing. Well, I believe there was 10 to 20 kilometers with the material above it that eroded away. But you're not considering how long would it take for 10 to 20 kilometers of material to erode away, and what would happen to the life forms on the earth that allegedly evolving one to another over millions of years while water is constantly flowing over the earth to erode 10 to 20 kilometers of material across. It couldn't happen just locally. It would have to have happened across the entire continent continually. How does evolution take place under those circumstances?
Well, I think you're putting a lot more into erosion than the plate tectonics. I mean, some of it's rising up and some of it's subducting under. It's not all just being wiped away in the way that you mean. But evolution can take place on erosion. I mean, erosion rates are probably fairly constant in most areas. But really, I don't have anything else to say. Just than that.
Well, what about you mentioned diatomaceous earth, things like chalk and whatnot. But crustaceans and even dinosaur fossils have been found in diatomaceous earth. Partially
Sure.
articulated dinosaurs and nearly fully articulated crustaceans have been found by the thousands in diatomaceous earth, which is chalk. And so if here's a couple of crazy things you got to think about. So let's say you have a dinosaur bone or 3 dinosaur bones from the same species found, in because it's disarticulated, in a chalk formation. So where'd that T-Rex come from, or the hadrosaur? Was he swimming in the ocean? Because secular scientists believe that chalk forms at a rate of 1 to 2 centimeters per 1,000 years on the ocean floor. Now, how many centimeters would it take to bury a dinosaur that weighs, oh, I don't know, 8 tons or 4 tons, okay, or 2 tons? Well, it'd take a lot. I mean, because not only would it have to bury the animal, but it would have to be compacted on top of the animal. So you need many, many, many more meters of it to make a solid material, right? To get a solid, hard, diatomaceous piece of earth that's 1 centimeter thick, you're going to need a foot or 5 feet of that material compressed and squeezed under pressure to make 1 centimeter of diatomaceous earth, right? Rock. Okay. So how long did that dinosaur have to stay in the water while ocean worms are devouring it, and other scavengers are eating it up and eating its bones, for it to be preserved under, I don't know, 40, 60 meters of diatoms that are loosely packed, like you pour salt on a table, right? All the grains are loosely compacted, but then you put the salt under a hydraulic press and you compress it with 12 tons, right? And then what you've got is a plate of salt that's 4 millimeters thick, right? Because you've squeezed all the space out of it, right? The same thing would happen in to create diatomaceous earth, a fossil in diatomaceous earth. See my point? So I just have to ask you, how in the world did a dinosaur or a fish or a crustacean survive without being completely disarticulated and turned into nothing by scavengers over a period of tens to hundreds of thousands of years, while it was ever so slowly buried by a trickle of dying diatoms in the ocean at a rate of 1 to 2 centimeters per year? You have to explain that to me,
Well,
because
sorry, go ahead.
no, no, sir. I'm through. Take plenty
All
of
right.
time. I was long-winded. Fair is fair. Take 4, 5, 6 minutes. Yeah.
Well, in an anaerobic environment, bones can survive for a long time, but I don't know about hundreds of thousands of years, but a long time. Whale bones in the bottom of the sea, even being eaten by polychaete worms, survive for hundreds of years. And those are species specific to whale bones. So it's not impossible to think that bones in an anaerobic environment can survive for a very long period of time and be buried. But it's not always, you can have rapid burial in diatomaceous earth without necessarily a trickle and still be in the diatomaceous earth. But I want to address another thing, just for the age of the earth, or the universe. How would you explain the existence of supergiant stars or supernova remnants? Now, supergiants have a lifespan of several 100,000 years on average, and the fact that we see that they have gone supernova indicates that they have reached the end of their lifespan. Now, that would either mean that they are old, or they were created old. So how would you explain that one?
Well, I think there's a lot of assumptions that go on in the secular camp about the formation of things. They'll say we are observing a star form. They're not really observing a star form. They observe a formation of gas and matter in space, and they assume there's a star forming. I showed you scientific references early in this debate where scientists admit that the formation of a planet, they don't have a clue. They believe that it formed naturally by accretion. They have to believe that because that's the only mechanism it could be if their worldview is true. But they can't show it to be true scientifically with observable, testable, repeatable science. So, and they admit that. I showed you a scientific reference from NASA, where in a 2010 Astro paper, where they said the formation of planets is one of the greatest mysteries, unsolved mysteries in astrophysics. They don't have a clue. They admit they don't have a clue how a planet can form. So I'm sorry, but I just think that the same is true of stars. They see something that looks like a gas cloud, it's thicker and denser in the center. They say, oh, a star is forming. Well, you're welcome to believe that. But, because you can see an image of something as it is now doesn't mean that it's forming into a star. In fact, I would say that stars prove creation, young Earth creation. There are stars that are called blue stars. They burn at such a rate, their temperature is so high that they look blue to us because, a blue flame is higher in temperature than a red flame, right? So they're blue stars. These blue stars are burning at such a rate, in such a temperature, and they're such size that there's no way they could be millions of years old. They would have burned up and be gone. I don't know how you could explain that. Blue stars, they just kill the uniformitarianist idea. They can't be millions of years old, and they couldn't even form in a million years because they're burning at such a rate that they couldn't even exist.
Well, not all stars are the same age. As I said, red supergiants are thought to exist for about a few 100,000 years based on the amount of hydrogen they would burn, where red dwarf stars would exist for billions. But so you're right, the blue stars wouldn't last very long, but they would form.
Well, how do you know they would form? What would cause them to form?
Well, gravity. I mean, we see, you said the stellar eggs, the gas clouds that are compacting. I mean, it's not that much of a stretch to say that these clouds will form a dense ball, so dense one day from gravity that nuclear fusion will start and a new star will be born. Now, we may even observe that one day. We haven't observed it yet, but I mean, if that is observed, I mean, what would you say?
I'd say star formation is also acknowledged by secular scientists as being a great mystery. They admit that too. I guess maybe you're not familiar with that. I hope I can find it in time. I'd like to share you a reference to that. Yeah, here. So let me share this on the screen. Let me share this on the screen. I can. Here we go. So star formation is a great mystery for secular camp. They have all kinds of ideas about how they form, but they can't demonstrate the stars form. They don't even have a scientific model that fits star formation. For example, here, published in 1990, published in Science, the formation of stars represents one of the most fundamental unsolved problems in contemporary astrophysics. Now, these guys aren't creationists. These are secular people. Here's a reference from 1986. Now, if you want to say, well, they couldn't do good science in 1986. Well, they had Cray supercomputers in 1986. Okay? Big enough to fill a room, but man, they could be millions of calculations per second. They'd let them run for a week, and they couldn't find a model that fits. The problem of star formation and planet formation are amongst the most important challenges facing modern astrophysics. This is from the University of Hawaii. And I'm not going to read all this for you. I've got lots of it. You see that? I'm telling you, secular scientists admit that they have no working model for the formation of stars, galaxies, or planets. They don't. They believe and they tell you they formed this way, but when asked what's the science behind it, they say, don't know. They don't know.
Well, I would say that since those papers were written, radio astronomy has already taken off and more stellar eggs have been found and more has been understood about them since then. So that's a common tactic I've noticed, is to kind of use outdated sources. Like I've heard the Stephen Jay Gould reference probably 100 times.
So if I showed you a reference, I showed you one from 1986. If I showed you one from 2003, would you say the same thing? Because I hear this spiel
Uh,
from evolutionists all the time. Oh, that's such an outdated source. It's from 1992. So are you telling me that the science has changed so much from 1992 to the present? The scientists were doing bad science in 1992. And if so, if their science was so bad in 1992, were all the claims of the evolutionists and uniformitarianists based on bad science in 1992?
I'm not saying they were doing bad science. I'm saying since then, a lot of new instruments, a lot of new radio telescopes have been made, a lot of new observations have been made that
So these
filled
scientific
in some of the gaps.
these admissions have been made all the way up to 2010 and later, and I showed you one from just 2010. Are you saying that in 2010 they didn't have the technology, they weren't doing well enough? They had NVIDIA, uh, 3D graphics cards. You could play Call of Duty 4, Call of Duty 6 or 7, whatever in 2010. But scientists can't make a good analogy with computers or anything about in models that demonstrate our views about planet or star formation are true in 2010. Really?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, I mean, we've made a lot of new
So,
observations. I
so
mean,
then, at what year? At what year was the science good enough that we can accept what the scientists say when they say we don't have a clue? Because they said that in 1976, 70, 86, 96, 06, 16. They're still saying it. So, at what year did the science become good enough when we could believe what they say?
I'm not saying it was never not good enough. I'm just saying, they made more observations since the 1970s or 80s,
Well, then,
90s, and even
where's
the
the
last few
publication that
years.
says? So, why did
And
they say in 2010 that they have the clueless? Are you telling me that you
well,
believe
it's never.
since 2010 NASA has discovered how planets form, but they were clueless till 2010? Is that what you're saying? You believe that?
Well, there have been since 2010. Actually, there have been some direct images of planetary nebula and accretion disks. So,
So you're
in a
saying
way,
yes.
yes.
Yes. So you believe that only since 2010 scientists had the technology and were able to make rational, intelligent discernments of the data uh, about how planets form, and it just so happened to confirm what they were saying in 1945, uh, only since 2010, right?
No, I'm just
It's
saying
always the
that they
latest
have.
technology that made it possible. Anything that happened 8 or 10 years ago is just out of date, right?
No, all their ideas are valid from that point. I mean, some of them have probably been disproven by observations we made more recently. But in the
Can you
last
provide me a
several years,
scientific
especially,
reference from secular scientists that says voila, we were wrong 5 years ago and now we're right? Is there any such
well, they say that all.
statement?
They say that quite a lot. I don't have a
They
reference
do?
for you, but they
I've never
they
seen
say,
that.
well, we got this model wrong. We're gonna have to rethink this. I mean, there are some things about
Oh,
star formation they
but
don't know.
but isn't that what they've always done? Isn't that what they've done since 2004? And here they're saying in 2010, NASA publishes, we haven't a clue. They got Cray supercomputers that the government spent millions of dollars on. They're calculating thousands and thousands, millions of calculations per second to make models to run the data through to figure out how a star forms in 2010, right? Millions. In 2010, I had a PC that had 4 cores, AMD 4-core CPU. It would do a billion calculations a second. A billion. And that's a slow PC compared to a desktop today. It would do a billion calculations a second. And these guys had crazy supercomputers that would fill a room because the government gives them millions upon millions of dollars, budget. They can buy whatever. And you're telling they were doing billions of calculations a second in 1986, 1996. And you're telling me that science, their models worked, didn't work, but you're telling me now it does? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that, I mean, they always had models, but new data comes in and they kind of rewrite it to some extent. I mean, like new exoplanets have kind of thrown monkey wrenches into how planetary
Can,
formation has
can you
seems to
provide me a
happen.
scientific reference where the scientists have used empirical science to demonstrate that planet formation by natural process is possible? Is there
Well,
such a thing? Has
I could
anybody
show
ever
you,
published such a thing?
I could show you direct images of planetary nebula with the planets in it. They're very
Well,
large
then
planets, but
you're assuming what you believe about what you see in the image. That's not an empirical model. That's not a software application run through a gray supercomputer, and it's not something we can observe over time. In a human lifetime is what, 50 to 90 years or 100, and you're telling me we can know that planet formed, or 50,000 or 5 million or 50 million years?
well, based on its temperature, the amount of dust in the nebula, I mean, they can estimate it. Yeah.
Based on your assumptions about the process and how long it takes, right?
Well, based on their ideas on how long it takes, but again,
Their
they can
idea.
come out with new ideas based on new data.
Based on their ideas or the data?
Data. It's data driven. They're not
What
out to
data
destroy
demonstrates that
the
planets formed any
universe.
faster than 2010 when NASA published a paper saying we're clueless about how planets and stars work?
Well, it's only been the
What
last
is
few
what has
years that
changed?
these.
Or
I'm,
do you know what has changed, or are you just
I'm
throwing
trying to
out
tell you.
what you think must be true in order to fix the problem?
Well, I follow exoplanets pretty closely, and it's only been the past few years that really direct images have come out of some of these exoplanets and some of these planetary
Images is
nebulas.
not a computer model.
Well,
That's
it's not
not
a
the
computer
same as
model, no.
direct data. The image that we see when we look at a star and photograph it today is identical to the one that they made in 1972. It's the same photograph, same star, nothing has changed. But you're believing it's forming over billions of years. See, so you can't go by photographic evidence. Look, trust me, I've studied at the New York Institute of Photography. You're not going to tell me that a photograph made of a star in 1972 is significantly different, galaxy forming, allegedly, in your mind, is any different significantly than one made today. It's not going to be. Okay, because after all, you believe these things take millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of years to form, right? So you're not going to observe any
Yeah.
significant difference in 40 years, right? So, but you're
No.
telling me that what you believe is true.
Well, I'm telling you, I'm talking about planetary formation, not galaxies. I was saying that in the last several years, there's been a breakthrough in imaging technology. I've kept up with that pretty close to make direct images of exoplanets, and that's been kind of a breakthrough in
But the images don't
how.
change anything, though. It's got to be because they still look the same. I mean, you have to provide a model. I mean, like I said, these things expand way beyond human lifespan. Okay, we're a drop. According to your worldview, a human lifespan is a drop of spit in a bucket compared to the lifespan to the formation of a galaxy. It's nothing. You can't possibly observe the formation of a galaxy change in any significant way in a human lifetime, according to your beliefs. It's not possible. No, because it takes billions of years. It takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of years for a galaxy to form. The difference we could see would be maybe 0.00001% change, right? And that would have to be consistent over time. And yet NASA publishes 2010. We're clueless how stars and galaxies form. We don't know. We have ideas, but we don't know. But you're telling me we do know.
Well, I'm
Tell
not
me
saying we know for
why
sure.
your
I'm saying they have
ideas
an idea,
usurps
like you said.
NASA.
What?
Why do your
Because
ideas usurp NASA?
No, they don't. I'm not saying that. But you brought up galaxies. Like a galaxy takes 200 million years to complete a rotation, and the fact that we have spiral galaxies is a proof of that rotation. Now, if the universe were only 6,000 years old, they would only completed a fraction of 1% of that rotation. So the arms of the galaxy shouldn't be as spun as they are, unless they were created with the appearance of age.
Yeah. Well, Zwicky noticed that the galaxies are spinning 10 times too fast on the outside. And she published her paper many, many years ago. Secular scientists don't disagree with him right to this very day. And then Vera Rubin is the first one she observed. Zwicky noticed the same thing, published the same conclusion a couple of decades later, and they're holding to that to this day. The problem is that the galaxies spin 10 times too fast on the outside. Now, what the secular camp's explanation that fixes this is, there's lots of imaginary dark matter that we can't see, just happens to coalesce around the outside of the galaxy and hold it together. Now, why would it coalesce around the outside and not the top of it? If dark matter collected around a galaxy, it would collect around the top, sides, and bottom, everywhere around the galaxy. If it did, it would deform it into a ball, not a galaxy. So how do you explain galaxies being flat and spiral when if dark matter was drawn to them, it should deform them in such a way they would be spherical?
I do know I don't know about planetary models that have been done, but I do know about galactic models that have been done. And just simple gravitational dynamics, a computer, they will form spirals like we see today. So, that's not really a problem.
Now, scientists don't have any model for that. What scientist has a model of empirical data that shows that a galaxy will form naturally? You do realize, don't you, that they invoke dark matter as the reason why the galaxy's arms have not flung out and the interior of it hasn't wound up. The dark matter wouldn't help the problem with the interior of the galaxy spinning up into a ball. But it would, if it were true, possibly help solve the problem why the arms of the spiral galaxy have not flung out, right? So how do you explain then that the fact that despite if dark matter fixed the problem with the spiral arms flying out, why it didn't turn the center of it into a ball? Why weren't all the stars gravitationally sucked into a spiral, into a massive superstar in the center of it?
Well, they are being pulled toward the center by usually there's a supermassive black hole in the middle of the galaxy, but the spin around it keeps them from falling into it. Do
you have any science papers that verify the things you believe?
I don't have them handy, no.
But you believe these things without a statement from a single scientist.
Well, I've read this stuff. I don't have it on me.
How do you know that what you've read is assumption or scientific data? Or how do you know that what you've read is not an assumption, but is an accurate interpretation of scientific data? Because that's really where this thing boils down. How do you know what you believe is an accurate interpretation of the scientific data? Everybody interprets the scientific data. I do, you do, right? So how do you know that your view represents an accurate interpretation of the scientific data?
I'm just going to stop you right before you answer, Jackson. The dialogue has been so good. I have it's gone about 10 minutes over, which is fine because we had a few minutes that we could kind of throw into the open discussion. So why don't we hand it over to you, Jackson? But since in terms of closing statements, you'd be the one to go first. We have 5 minutes for each of you in terms of closing statements. So Jackson, why don't you take 5 minutes or however much time you feel like you need. You can address Neff's points there as well as wrap things up. Jackson, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of what he's saying is inaccurate, or I mean, he's right, we both assume certain things, but you know, when it comes to scientists, they try to be objective. They're not out to disprove any certain thing and prove their model. And if they are, the peer review kind of takes care of that. But you know, radiometric dating is accurate. I mean, I've seen Mount St. Helens brought up a lot with the rate tests. I have a whole thing written up on that. You didn't mention that though, but I'll talk about that for a second. They used potassium argon dating to date the Mount St. Helens sample, which is the wrong kind of dating method. It's equivalent to what I was saying before, basically using a human scale to weigh an elephant. You're going to get a reading, but it's going to be wrong. So ion source memory is basically the source of that false reading. And I just want to get to some of the stuff I wrote down, just going unused. But another common argument I've seen is carbon-14 in diamonds. Neff didn't address that, but I'll talk about it for a second. If the radiocarbon were intrinsic to the samples rate used from the diamonds, the ratio of carbon-14, carbon-13, and carbon-12 should have changed in unison with the sample current in the mass spectrometer. However, they didn't, which provides strong evidence for contamination. And furthermore, coal and diamond samples have been measured by others down to intrinsic background levels, giving no evidence for intrinsic, down to instrument background levels, giving no evidence for intrinsic radiocarbon. We talked about supernovas and supernova remnants, folded rock layers. You can talk about the Earth's rotation slowing, but that's a common argument. The Earth's rotation slows 0.005 seconds per year, which means that 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth's day would have been 14 hours, which isn't impossible. But back to, I've talked so much about unrelated stuff, I forgot what Neff was saying. But yeah, I think the evidence is overwhelming that the Earth is older than 6,000 years old. Even if it's not 4.6 billion years old, I mean, the speed of light, in fact, we can measure that. And the fact that it would kind of discredit relativity if the speed of light could change, I think is strong evidence that the universe itself is old. And I didn't hear Neff address that one. If he wants to address that, he can. But that's basically what I have to say. So I'll hand it over.
All right. Well, I appreciate that closing statement, Jackson. Neff, you now have the floor for your closing statement. You got 5 minutes. I'll give you a 1 minute warning, and the floor is yours. I see you want to share screen. Let me get that up there for you.
Okay. So carbon-14 can't be contaminated. The tetrahedron bonding of carbon is so great, is so powerful, and so compacted that nothing gets in. Getting these elements inside carbon, uranium, and whatnot is not possible. They won't go in. Now I'm going to share another screen. I appreciate if you could share this other image with me. This one. This gives an example as to why we know this is true. You see, uranium has 92 protons and 146 neutrons. But carbon-14 has only 6 protons and 8 neutrons. It's really compacted, tight. Okay? You're never going to get uranium to go inside carbon with carbon's tetrahedron bonding, it's not going to happen. There's nowhere for a molecule of this mass to squeeze in between molecules of this mass when they're bound to each other in every direction. It's not going to happen. This one is much more massive than that one. 92 protons, 146 neutrons. But carbon has only 6 protons and 8 neutrons. And they bond with 4 others in every single direction, above, to the left, to the right, below. In tight, super tight, because they're small atoms. They're bound to each other in a really tight matrix. So how are you going to squeeze this big guy into that? That'd be like trying to push a football field into your backyard. It's not going to happen. Just can't fit. It's not going in. So contamination of diamonds is not an answer. The fact that diamonds have carbon-14 in them then proves the diamond is young. If the diamond is young, everything about uniformitarianism is false. It's simply false. I think I've provided adequate evidence. I could talk to you for hours about the scientific evidence that the Earth is young, geologically. There is so much that I haven't even touched upon, but I don't have time to, that the Earth is young. But what we should take away from this debate is that my opponent has to believe that his false interpretation of scientific data, which is not empirical, it's not observable, testable, and repeatable, is why things are the way they are. When observable, testable, repeatable, empirical science provides all kinds of problems that refutes this idea, like the rate at which the oceans are increasing and their salination, the rate of the erosion of the continents can't be millions of years old. There would be no continents in millions of years. 12.4 million years ago, the continents would have been eroded down to sea level. And the list of evidences goes on and on and on and on. I just don't have time to even bring up the small fraction of them. The scientific reasons we can believe the Earth is young. Evolutionists believe the Earth is young, hundreds of, billions of years old, because this is what they need to believe, because they reject creation. There's no science behind it. It's a philosophy which they hold to because they refuse to believe the biblical narrative, the creation account. They don't want to believe the Earth was created, and so they'll believe an idea without scientifically verifiable scientific data, such as, oh, that star looks like it's forming.
1 minute.
But we can't observe that because, we only live 50 to 90 years, right? So, but we believe it's forming, therefore it is. This is the way they explain things. And they do it constantly in every field of science. And it just can't be true. It's not based on empirical science. It's based on a philosophy that naturalism explains everything in the world, and supernaturalism doesn't explain anything. And it's a false interpretation of scientific data. And when provided with scientific data that refutes what they say, they often gloss over it, step aside, and start talking about something else, because they don't know how to respond to real scientific data. I'm done.
All right, just on time. Well, gentlemen, that concludes the debate. It's already been a couple hours, and I want to say that was a great debate. Lots of good topics, lots of good discussion. We've had a great chat with a ton of great questions, as well as a lot of support as well. So thank you guys for the super stickers and super chat. So gentlemen, looks like we're getting right into the audience Q&A. So why don't we get right into the first question? But I do want to acknowledge One God is Nowhere One. He gives a $25 super chat.
His name is One God is Now Here.
Oh, yes. One God is now here one. Yes. I really messed that one up. So I stand corrected. That makes more sense now. One God is now here one. So I appreciate, brother, the support. He says, God bless Neph and SFT, your brother in Christ. God is now here. Amen. Amen. Well said. George Bond in the house. Super chat says, buy Neph a coffee. That was an awesome opening knockout in the first round. Well, I appreciate the super chat, George. And he's giving you a compliment there, Neph. You got some fans in the chat. And Neph, we'll both have a coffee. We'll both have a coffee, brother.
Sounds good.
And
make mine black and
yes.
Colombian.
Hey, that's the healthiest way. And NephilimFree. There's 2 NephilimFrees out there. We got a super chat from Neph. Thank you, brother. He says, SFT addressed the heat problem recently with a creationist scientist. Check for that. Well, I appreciate the super chat, NephilimFree. So, Jackson, oftentimes the super chats are just comments and not necessarily questions. So why don't we just get into the right question here then, or the first question. So this question is from Resist Vaccine Police. Okay, thank you for your question, brother. He says, question for free. So I guess that would be you, Neph.
Yeah.
Are ghost craters strong evidence for a young moon?
Well, I have to admit, I don't know what a ghost crater is, but I think that the fact that the vast majority of craters on the moon are facing the Earth is a very curious thing. We have to wonder, why is that so? If you think that it doesn't have anything to do with the geology of the Earth, now I'm not proposing that the vast majority of craters on the moon were caused by the Earth in some way. I do hold that the hydroplate theory is correct. I think that theory is scientifically sound. However, you still have to wonder if the majority of craters on the moon facing the Earth, and yet the other side of the moon is almost vacant of craters in comparison. You have to wonder, were they related to the Earth, or did they just happen to miss the Earth and all somehow aim at the moon coming from somewhere else in the solar system or galaxy? See, you kind of have to push your limit of reasoning to think that they're not related to the Earth in some way, right? So my idea is that when the Earth split, the waters inside the Earth were under such pressure, 64,000 pounds per square inch, and maybe greatly exceeding that. The water became superfluid, shot through the Earth's atmosphere as a column of zero viscosity water that literally cut like through the atmosphere like a knife, like a samurai sword. Spow! Right through the Earth, and shot water into the Earth space. Since the Earth is spinning, that column of water would rotate in every direction all around the Earth. Some of it would inevitably be facing the moon, and could have pelted the moon with innumerable bits of ice. Now, that is my belief about why the moon facing the Earth has a tremendous number of craters, while the backside has relatively few. And I think the gravity of the Earth, the moon, would actually have drawn some of those ejected bits of ice back towards the moon and impacted the backside of it because of the same process. So I think the Noahic flood explains the immense cratering of the moon.
I appreciate that answer, Neph. I appreciate the question as well. Jackson, the floor is yours if you had anything you wanted to say to that question as well. Go ahead.
Well, that might explain the Earth's moon, but what about the most heavily cratered body in the solar system, Callisto? You can't really explain all the craters on Callisto the same way. And really, the only way the amount of craters could accumulate is with a large amount of time. So that would be my response.
Well, I appreciate that, Jackson. And as we always do here, whoever the question was for, we like to give them the last word. Therefore, Neff, some final thoughts on that question, or any final thoughts on what Jackson stated there? Go ahead.
I'll just say the secular camp has no explanation for anything. So they're not able to explain it either, except to build a huge hierarchy of assumptions and then declare them to be scientific fact.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I appreciate you guys keeping it engaging. We got the next question here is from George Bond. So I appreciate it, George. Question is for JR. So that'd be you, Jackson Roe. The question he has for you is, we only observe supernovas on achieving every 30 years, but never see stars forming. Why is that?
Well, it's true. That's part of the mystery Neff was talking about. But it's likely someday we will see a star form. But we do see the stellar eggs, the gas congealing into a dense ball. And I don't think it's that much of an assumption to think that someday that gas ball will reach such a pressure that nuclear fusion will start. So I think someday we might see a star form. We might not, but I think it's pretty clear that they do form.
Okay, I appreciate that response there. Jackson, Neff, did you have anything you wanted to respond with?
I would just say that secular scientists acknowledge in their scientific papers when publishing for other scientists to read and review that they are clueless as to how stars form. They have a theory, and they admit that the theory doesn't work.
All right, well, I appreciate that. And that question was for you, though, Jackson, so you can have the final word on that one. Go ahead.
Well, I don't really have much to say besides what I just said. I think that it's not much of an assumption to say that gravity will eventually condense into a fusion reaction.
Okay, well, I appreciate the responses from the both of you. We got a question here from Hate Love Nothing. I appreciate the question. Question for panelist Jackson. So here's the question for you, Jackson. He asks,
okay,
why do you believe the world is billions of years old? Do you have any witnesses?
Well, of course I don't have any witnesses. That would be impossible. But technically you don't have any witnesses either. We do have evidence that the Earth is older than 6,000 years old. That's definitely for sure. There are trees older than 6,000 years old. There are blast sponges older than that. Radiometric dating, which does work, despite what Neff was saying, can cross-reference itself through multiple dating methods. Uranium, lead, potassium, argon, and they all come out to within a few percentage of the same answer. I was reading a paper on meteorites being dated in that way, and there are multiple samples from multiple meteorites, all being cross-referenced and all coming out to within 4 to 4.5 billion years. So that's an incredible coincidence, I think. So that would be my answer.
Okay, I appreciate that, Jackson. And Neff, if you had a few points you wanted to make, go ahead. The floor is yours.
I would just point out that in the early part of my debate, I provided a few, a dozen or so, of the thousands of scientific references that radiometric dating processes contradict each other in extraordinary ways, sometimes with incredible percentages, including I showed you that one rock formation at the bottom of the Grand Canyon is dated to be younger than the rock formation at the top of it by the same dating method. The difference was millions of years difference. So dating methods are not empirical data. They're not empirical. They rely upon assumptions. You have to assume that no contamination has occurred by parent or daughter, and the materials that formed was formed nearly instantaneously. You nearly have to believe that it just was snapped into existence in order to believe that radiometric dating can be true, because flowing volcanic materials, they move. And if they move, then when they solidify and you find X amount of parent and daughter isotope in that particular rock, you can't declare that the rock is of a given age. And that holds true also for metamorphic rock, which comprises a lot of the Earth's rock. So dating methods are not empirical evidence. They rely upon assumptions, and they can't be used as to declare the age of the Earth.
I appreciate that response there, Neff. And Jackson, if you want some final words, go ahead, or we can move on to the next question. It's up to you.
Well, when you said the same dating method was used at the top and the bottom of the strata, again, that goes back to when you use the same type of dating method on a sample that's known to be younger. Like for example, the rate tests, they use geochron labs. It says for potassium argon, you shouldn't go below 2 million year old, known to be below 2 million years old, or it's going to come back the wrong answer. So I think that would explain why the layer at the top and the bottom came back so wildly different. That's all I would have to say.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, here's a more easygoing question from Ryan the Raptor guy. Ryan, I appreciate your question. He says, question for both debaters. What is your favorite fossil? Out of all those billions of fossils, gentlemen, what's your number one favorite? Whoever wants to start, go ahead.
Nothing, go first. I need to think for a second.
Oh, okay. So I think what's called the fine-eating dinosaurs is my favorite. It's the most extraordinary fossil find in the history of the world. It is I can't remember the name of the creature. A small, relatively small dinosaur fighting with a velociraptor, which also a small dinosaur, stood about 5 to 6.5 feet tall. And no, that's anyway. The velociraptor was actually shorter than that. But these two creatures are locked in a fight to the death, where the one dinosaur has the velociraptor's leg or hand in its mouth, and the velociraptor has its foot upside the head of the other dinosaur, clawing at its skull. They were literally buried so fast that they didn't have the time to move their body parts before they were buried in an incredible slough of soft but water-filled material that literally, like loose mud, encased them so quickly they couldn't move. It happened instantly. It happened in less than 3 seconds. It was so fast. Just they were buried. Bam! That fast. And the dinosaur, one has the hand of the velociraptor in its mouth, and the velociraptor has its claw upside the head of the dinosaur, and it's clawing him, and they're captured in a fight to the death. When they're trying to kill each other, basically. I think the velociraptor is actually trying to survive, and the other dinosaur is trying to kill it. But they were encased so quickly that their bodies were frozen in that exact position. It's truly the most amazing fossil find in the world, and you should look at it. And it demonstrates that fossils form extreme. All the creatures of the world were encased in sediments extremely rapidly And that's why we have fossils. If it weren't so, we wouldn't have any.
I appreciate that answer, Neff. Good answer. And Jackson, what's your favorite fossil, my good man?
That's a good one. He mentioned that it's Protoceratops is the one. Is what he was thinking of.
Yes,
It's the second dinosaur.
Protoceratops. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
And my favorite fossil is probably Yutyrannus. There have been 3 specimens found. It's my favorite because it's a feathered dinosaur. All 3 specimens were found with some variation of feathers in some location on their body. And it was the thing about it was a 30-foot tyrannosaur species. So for that reason, that's my favorite the series of fossils that were found, I think.
Well, thank you to the both of you. And great question from Ryan the Raptor guy. I appreciate it, Ryan. So question here from Cheryl. Thank you for the question. Sister, she says, is Neff having an after show?
Yes, Neff will have an after show.
Okay. So guys, head on over to Neff's channel after this debate. We've just got a couple more questions to get through. We are over the 2-hour mark. So definitely head on over to Neff's channel. Jerome says, big thanks for the ministry. I appreciate it, brother. I appreciate the kind words. So let's move on to this next question here from, let's see. No, I just asked that one. So question from Reverend Gary Crawford. Thank you for the question. Question is for Roe. So questions for you, Jackson. He says, how do you explain mile-long boulders in glaciers?
Well, I would say glaciers move, especially during the Ice Age. So I think kind of like a snowball, it would have picked something up. I don't really know much about that, but that would be my interpretation of that.
Okay, thank you for the response there. Jackson, I'm going to hand it to you, Neff, as well, if you wanted a response. And pertaining to your after show, Neff, we've got a comment here. They're asking if you can post the link at the end. Myself to post it. So what I'll do, as you're answering this, Neff, I'm going to go to your channel and I'm going to post the link to it in the live chat for people to see. So go ahead, Neff. The floor is yours, and I'll do that.
Okay, I'm trying to work that out real quick. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, no problem.
I'm trying to click on YouTube and listen to. Could you do that?
Of course, yeah. So the question is, it was for Jackson, and it was from Reverend Gary Crawford. He was just asking, how do you explain mile-long boulders in glaciers?
Well, I'd say a mile-long boulder and a glacier could only be explained by catastrophism. If the layers of ice in a glacier formed over, annually, as the evolutionists have been claiming since the mid 1800s, early 1800s, then it just wouldn't be possible to find these things. It just can't be. But I think a mile-long glacier, there are many evidences that earthquakes of astonishing power took place during the Noahic flood. And this could possibly explain that. Earthquakes so great that it would be impossible for you to stand on your feet while it was occurring. And liquefaction events and examples throughout the earth demonstrate that, where water is shot up through geologic column, proving that the strata that they shot up through weren't of vast age either, because they still had to be soft and moist for the liquefaction to shoot the water up through them and create an extrusion event. In the past, we have evidence of earthquakes that, everybody says an earthquake of 5, 6 point something is really high. That's terrible damage, right? There were probably earthquakes in the past that took place during the Noahic flood that measured on the Richter scale of 16 or more. And we have evidence for that. 1 mile long slabs of material earth crust that are layered over the other like dinner plates stacked partially upon each other. That's incredible. You can't explain that without an earthquake of R16 level or greater. Now, the uniformitarianist's worldview doesn't allow for R16 worldview, R16 earthquakes. Such things could never happen.
Thank you, Neff. And Jackson, since the question was originally for you, if you'd like to, you can have the final word on that one.
Well, he's talking about Noah's flood. I don't think the flood necessarily is the absurd part of the story. I think it's more the ark. To me, that's the part that really kind of discredits the whole idea. I mean, 2 animals of every kind and rampant inbreeding afterward. The amount of care that would have been needed for a year-long voyage. I mean, that's for another debate, but I'm just saying, I think that's a major hole in that whole story.
All right. Well, thank you, Jackson. Thank you as well, Neff. I've got a link up on the screen, link to Neff's channel, guys. So check that out for the after show. And Jackson, you are also invited to it, of course, just like the debate a couple of weeks ago. Super sticker from Cheryl. Thank you so much. I appreciate the support. Like I always say, you guys are all the life and blood of this channel. So God bless you, and I really appreciate it. And that being said, we are going to have one last question because the debaters have been so generous with their time, and we're going on 2 hours and about 15 minutes soon. So let's make this the last question. Question is from Alec Cox. I appreciate the question, Alec. Question is for you, Jackson. So he asks, is he aware that Mount St. Helens created the mini Grand Canyon in less than a week? New evidence that there is a huge disturbance at Yellowstone. And then he says, not old. Jackson, so the floor is yours. You can respond to that.
Well, yeah, I'm aware of the canyon being made in Mount St. Helens, but I don't think that proves that the Grand Canyon was necessarily formed quickly. As for the Yellowstone volcano, I'm not sure how that proves an old or young Earth. I just think it's becoming active again, or starting to show signs that it might become active. So, I mean, that would be pretty catastrophic if that blows up. That's really the only comment I have on that.
Okay, Jackson, I appreciate that. I also appreciate the question. Alec, Neff, if you wanted a response, go ahead.
Well, I would just say that the evolutionist ideas about these things and all things geological are based upon assumptions of uniformitarianism. They can't be supported, and they have no working models for any of it. They have ideas they push off as science, but they're never able to demonstrate anything that they say is true with observability, because firstly, it requires too much time for a human being to observe it, and secondly, they have to extrapolate these ideas into the distant past because of their beliefs. And thirdly, they don't have a working computer model for it. None of them, for any of their views in uniformitarianism, as I've already shown a few examples of during this debate.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, Neff. And looks like Jackson, once again, this question was for you. So if you'd like the last word, go ahead.
Well, I think they're working models. I'm just not the best representative to display them. But did you guys freeze? It looks like you froze.
Oh, what's that, Jackson?
I thought you froze for a second. Never mind.
Oh, maybe I was a little too still there, but as long as it's good, go ahead, Jackson.
Really, I kind of lost my train of thought. I don't have much more to add to that one.
No, that's fine. That's fine, guys. This was a great debate. We're going on 2 hours and 15 minutes. So you have both earned a well-deserved break. We can relax over on the after show. Looks like Neff has set it up. So it's there on his channel. I've linked his channel. Neff also linked the StreamYard link for everybody in the live chat. We've had a great chat today. Tons of good questions. God bless everybody. I thank you so much for the support in terms of the super stickers, super chats. But before we end it here, I want to give both debaters just a minute here for some final words, final thoughts. And then we'll call it a night and head on over to the after show. So why don't we start with Jackson? Jackson, once again, thank you so much for being here. This was
Thanks for having me.
a very fun debate. I had a lot of fun. So yeah, my pleasure, Jackson. Any final words?
Well, I'm not sure how I did on this one. It feels like Neff may have gotten the upper hand, I'll admit. I mean, I think the Earth is old, and I think someone else may have represented the point better than I did here. But you know, I think I got some good points in nonetheless. So it was fun.
Awesome. I appreciate those final words, Jackson. Definitely a lot of fun. I know we've got some more debates set up for you as well. So I want to thank you for being willing, Jackson, to discuss these topics. These are incredibly important topics, you know, these topics pertaining to origins. And I want to thank you, Jackson, for always keeping it respectful and cordial.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
Absolutely.
that. And Neff, brother, some final words, my good man.
I just want to say that I appreciate Jackson coming to debate this with me because I've enjoyed it. I love to debate, and I love to provide evidence that causes people to change their minds about what they've been, fed in public schools and on secular media and television all their life. And I enjoy sharing evidence and information that helps change people's minds and convert people into believing, lift the wool from their eyes. And so I've enjoyed this debate, and I appreciate you hosting it. And Jackson, I hope that you and I have an engagement in the future, and that we're able to have some more cordial and friendly discussions. And I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too.
Amen. Well said to the both of you. These are my favorite kinds of debates, some engaging dialogue. You guys both touched on a number of great topics, and you kept it respectful, cordial, and clean, and we're able to shake hands like this at the end of the debate. So definitely one to remember. Everybody in the chat, God bless. God bless you gentlemen as well. Let's head on over to NephilimFree's channel for a wild night. The night continues, I should say. So good job to the both of you, and we'll see you later. Standing for Truth is out.